media portals help us to get more insightful ideas about what is happening in the world, right? So without further delay, so I will like to invite our panelists here. So first one is Sri K.G. Sureshji. He is Director General of IIMC, a very prestigious institution. Sir, this side please. So previously he has been associated with Doordarshan as Senior Consulting Editor, and he has been associated with various other networks also. So his profile says he is a communication strategist. So the perfect name and perfect person to talk about media. Right. Second person I will like to invite is the head of this institution, founder and director of Chanakya IAS Academy, Sri A.K. Mishra ji. The Chanakya IAS Academy is a very prestigious institution who trains future bureaucrats. So again, we all know bureaucracy is part of the establishment. So again, a very important person to talk about this topic. Third panelist. So I would like to invite Mr. J. Sai Deepak, a fellow IITian, a rare IITian in the business of advocacy and judiciary. So he practices in the Supreme Court of India and Delhi High Court. So he recently got famous for his arguments for Sabrimala. Right. So he is also legal mentor of India Collective Trust, a very innovative approach who fights for the cases which were generally discarded or which were pushed on the sidelines. So that trust takes those kind of cases, and J. Sai Deepak has been very instrumental to push those topics. Our moderator is going to be my colleague Ashish Dhar. He is co-founder of UPWORD, a very famous personality on social media. Most of you must be following him, right? So Ashish Deepak, Ashish. So Ashish Dhar is going to introduce the topic, and so we will try to finish the panel discussion by 4:30. Ashish, because K.G. Sureshji has to catch a flight.
I think we'll finish it by 4:45. We have a flight at 7.
Right. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajay. So I'll begin with thanking all the panelists for taking the time to attend this and to enlighten all of us. To set the agenda in motion, I will just try to deconstruct the title of this panel discussion, which is Media and the Art of Manufacturing Narrative. So these are all jargonistic words that we are all familiar with, and some of us don't really understand what each of these words really means. It's all thrown about casually in the media and on television, and people are generally have their own notions about what narrative is, what political correctness is, and rightly so, because these are very commonplace terms and everyone is entitled to his own views about these things. पर ऐसा होता है कि किसी चीज का एक particular, it has a very particular connotation when it is spoken about in terms of how it shapes public opinion. When we talk about narrative, it is basically a way of putting things together. It is a way of connecting the dots and to establish a causal relationship between disparate events that have happened and to give it a sense of meaning. कि अभी कहीं पे किसी की लिंचिंग हो गई तो अच्छा ये लिंचिंग इस वजह से हुई क्योंकि यहाँ पे ये प्रॉब्लम चल रहा है. इंडिया में बहुत टाइम से communal divide है. All those things that go about, that come on the media. So that is narrative, and the media specializes in creating narrative. But we've used the term manufacturing narrative in a very specific sense. It is because narratives are created every day. We talk to each other, we are creating narratives. But when you manufacture narratives, it is with a certain end goal in mind. And that end goal is dictated by political correctness. To come to what political correctness is, it has origins in the Marxist political theory and its later manifestation in cultural Marxism, when things which were not considered ideal to bring about a revolution, those were considered to be politically incorrect. But in normal conversations, politically incorrect is something which goes against the mainstream view that a society holds. When you say something like, for example, that America ने अपने आप पे attack करवाया. 9/11 was an attack that America did on its own. It's a conspiracy theory, and it's also politically incorrect because it does not fit with the larger understanding of how the world works. Political correctness has benefits in terms of being safe. If you say something which is politically correct, you don't get socially ostracized. In fact, you are rewarded for what you are saying. But at the same time, the truth is also considered to be inconvenient. So if you say something which is politically incorrect, it often is inconvenient, and sometimes it is closer to the truth than the other opinion which you are opposing. So coming to the panelists, I would first like Mr. Mishra to speak about the power of the narrative in terms of its positive effects. So you are an educationist. आप ये institution चलाते हैं, this hugely successful institution, which churns out every year. It creates great leaders, great bureaucrats of the future. So how do you motivate people? Just to give the audience a sense of what narrative is about. एक तो पार्ट हो गया कि आप उनको जो बेसिक सब्जेक्ट्स हैं उनके बारे में बताते हैं, पर उसके अलावा यू आर ऑल्सो गिविंग देम अ सेंस ऑफ सेल्फ बिलीफ. एक स्टोरी सी उनकी अपनी पर्सनल लाइफ की होती है कि मैं ये कर सकता हूँ. इट्स अ ह्यूजली कॉम्पिटिटिव एग्जाम, मैंने कभी नहीं सोचा करने का. सो दैट्स समथिंग दैट that must be part of the training, I suppose. So can you just shed a little bit of light about what narratives are created when you talk to your students?
Thank you. I just take you back to 93 when I introduced the organization in 93. The prevailing concept was very different. It was a belief that only the people who come from very renowned institutions or maybe to the family of the officers, only they can become officers. And since I began my life from a small village in Jharkhand today, and I had my journey and all the struggles in my life to see, and when I was in the university, so this was a normal belief that not everybody can become IAS, only those who are toppers, only they are distinction holders, they can become there. I changed the narrative here, I changed the concept here, and this is what brought me to this line. I didn't want to go myself into IAS and retire one day, but thought of giving a lot of these things to people. First belief was whether I can do it, so many people said it's not possible, cup of tea for anybody to make such an IAS institution and compete in the market. This was something which I did not accept, and then I started speaking to the people, changing their narratives in the sense that even the students from Hindi medium can become IAS, the people from small areas can become IAS. The question used to come how, then I explained how it is possible. It's not the academic excellence which you need here in this exam. There is no need of having very high distinctions and marks there. So UPSC has never given a criteria that you should have this much percentage in graduation, then only you can go for CILS examination. But the UPSC has given this facility to appear in any language you prefer, or anybody coming from any college is going to qualify, then there is nothing to fear. So I came with a lot of facts and figures that when the people said that 10 lakhs people appear in the exam, okay, so there are 10 lakh people fill up the forms. They don't compete in the exam. Only 5 lakh people go in the examination hall. Those who compete, their number is hardly about 50 to 60,000. So this way, the prevailing belief, I kept changing. So this gradually brought me to start motivational talks. That not in a small classroom or maybe among few people I could just make a change. Then I started my Art of Success series of talks there to go in the public, to address the students, right, and make them understand that it is the popular belief which you have in mind because of media. Because whenever any result comes, there is hype of only the toppers there in the newspaper. This is very scary for the students because students feel that only the IITians can become officers, only they can be toppers. There is no news of the people who are going to succeed with even lesser marks than. So this is something that brought me again to think of a program in DD National. That's why I have started this Success Speaks program in DD National that comes every Saturday, so that I can reach to the largest number of students there who have a lot of misconceptions in their mind, okay, who can become or who cannot become. So I pick up one story of any struggler and then I present before that how it is possible. So this way, my experience tells that even when somebody has to attempt for something, if there is the right perspective given, there are a lot of myths if they are taken away and the students are exposed to the real atmosphere, then they can get a lot of things there. And the same thing also helps them to do better in their service also. So here motivation plays very important role. Motivation is how much capability you have within and what is the actual challenge there and what kind of exam is this, which is not going to taste your academic excellence, but it is going to see your basic traits of personality which will be effective in your administration. So if this kind of communication is given to the student, they are able to pick up better. And that is what helped me to get so much of result here there. One interesting example I will give you: when I started training for civil services interview, students used to come from villages, they went up to the mains level, but when they went to the UPSC hall, they used to get scared. That this is a air-conditioned atmosphere, it is difficult to answer, maybe I have to speak only English. So this is where I started the mock interview program. I would pioneer in this way to give a complete panel, start camera recording and expose them to this is what you have been doing and you have to modify yourself that way. And this training helped them to go confidently in the UPSC. That was the time I used to take the student in the 5-star hotel for their training for 25 years ago, which was a news in the media also that there is someone coming from Bihar taking the students to interview in the 5-star hotel. The idea was to give them exposure so that they don't get scared when they go to UPSC. Today we have air-conditioned atmosphere everywhere, but it was not the thing there in that time of time. So I'll just add on something more. I think meanwhile you can start discussing with other panelists.
Sure. Thank you very much. That was very insightful. And why I asked you this specific question is because I sort of knew, I had done my bit of research about the institute and I sort of knew the story. So the distinction that I wanted to emphasize here between two kinds of narratives. One is a narrative that you have built for your people, right? So it's a bottom-up narrative where you've taken the initiative as an individual and you're inspiring your students and they're getting access to better education and better opportunities because now with your guidance and the institute that you've set up, they can aspire to do things which probably in their past they would have never dreamed of, right? So that's the positive aspect of a narrative. The negative aspect is a top-down narrative where people from the top tell you that this is how things are supposed to be, which is more like how the Britishers have their narrative. When you talk about colonial times, you were told that you are this kind of people. Just today we are, before I was coming here, my friend Malika, she sent me a link of a new article which has come out which supposedly proves the Aryan invasion theory yet again. Yeah. So this is an example of another narrative where, you are being told that नहीं तुम हो, तुम बाहर से आए थे, नहीं तुम यहीं के थे, ये यहाँ का था, तुम बाहर से थे. No one really cares, you go into the streets, except the states where this has been really, really insidiously planned and deployed, this sort of a scheming narrative. In other places, no one really cares. You go to a sabzi wala, आप उससे बात करो कि आपके 4,500 साल पहले जो आपके पर दादा थे, वो इधर आए थे और वो पहले वो यूरोप से थे, कहेगा होंगे यार मैं तो अभी सब्जी बेच रहा हूँ. So that kind of narrative which is sort of, you could say, it's thrust down people's throats. That is the kind of narrative that I think is problematic. Now coming to you, Sai Deepak, there is a multiplicity of narratives in the Indian tradition, and you are someone who's fighting legal battles for our civilization. Now, in our tradition, there are multiple ways of looking at the same thing, right? So there is the famous parable where someone is, आप ब्रह्मन को कैसे डिस्क्राइब करते हो? आप एक हाथी है, आप कोई उसका टांग पकड़ के बोलता है ये ऐसा है, कोई उसकी कान पकड़ के बोलता है. So there is different perspectives which are sort of synthesized, and then you have a whole based on which you understand, acha, it's something which is beyond me, and it is something which is not intellectually explainable. It is beyond the limits that language imposes on reality. But in your practice as an advocate, you often must, I suppose you come across adversarial narratives which have a grain of truth, right? Giving an example of the recent Diwali firecracker ban case. So the original petitioner is someone who's saying that pollution hota hai aur ye hota hai. Or then there is the other perspective which is about the manufacturers of the crackers and their employment. And third is, of course, the cultural aspect representing the people of India and Hindus. So these are three equally valid perspectives in a sense. क्योंकि दिवाली के बाद pollution होता है एक दिन के लिए ज़्यादा, there is no denial. So how do you deal with these aspects? कि when you find that your adversary or the counter, the person who's giving you a counter argument, there is some grain of truth in his perspective.
See, it so happens that if you're a true believer in the civilizational roots of India and its intellectual traditions, it's going to be hard for you to take a position where you say the other side is entirely wrong. It is not in your spirit to say that I know everything and mine is the only way and that everybody else has to necessarily subscribe to my point of view. Now, because of that, by default, in most of these discussions in left versus right or whatever it is, you will always find even the most hardcore of so-called right-wingers or Indic wingers, as I would call them, being open to accommodate the other side's point of view, but you will never find the same openness on the left. Now, this is sometimes a good, let's say, character, it's a good virtue to have, or it's a good feature. But in certain instances, because of the vehemence of the other side and its tendency to portray you in one particular hue altogether, you're forced to adopt that strategy in order for you to come across as convincing, because it so happens that if you end up yielding some space in an adversarial forum, then it would seem as if you're being defensive. Unfortunately, there is that problem. So you agree that the other side is right. They won't see it as me saying the other side is right, but I am also right, but they'll only see it as, oh, so you agree that the other side has a point. That I have a point is completely lost. That point is completely missed. So sometimes it takes me back to some of my own readings. Do we really subscribe to this notion that all views or all points of view have a right to exist? And there, a discussion between Bhishma and Yudhishthira when he's on the Vanokishaya is that discourse is an extremely relevant discourse that I found. And that is something that we don't really talk about much for some reason. I don't know why are we shying away from it. One of the things that he tells Yudhishthira is, apart from the Vishnu Sahasranam and everything else that he imparts as education, is that apne ghode ke samne vedon ko rakho and make sure that you take it across the length and breadth of this land. Whichever entity, whichever individual, whichever kingdom fails to recognize the sanctity of the Vedas, finish. That was his instruction to Yudhishthira. That was the original instruction. So I don't want to subscribe to this notion that we are entirely pacifist. I don't think so. There is an inherent Kshatriya Dharma, Kshatriya spirit which we keep suppressing over and over again for some reason, because we are scared of coming across as warmongering boards for some reason. So I think that needs that we need to stop playing on the defensive on that particular front. What we need to be proud of is that we have evolved. I'm not saying therefore the first standpoint was wrong. That was at a stage where you're surrounded by tribes. That was at a stage that your man-eating tribes were legitimately there. They existed. So Khandwa Press ko jalana ho ya jo kuch bhi karna ho, they did not shy away from doing it before it was set up, before Indraprastha was set up. So after a point of time you realize that perhaps it is time for us to go to the 2.0, which is let everybody have their own point of view. I will believe that mine is perhaps the only point of view which is right, but I will certainly not go to the extent of imposing it on somebody else. So I'm completely fine with any point of view, any faith system, any value system which believes that its way is the only right way, so long as the additional pillar of proselytization or conversion is not added to that particular point of view. So this is something that we need to understand. In my own daily practice, whenever we take up constitutional matters, there is a tendency sometimes even on the most vociferous and vehement supporters of our side to come across as extremely defensive when talking about a tradition or discussing the tradition. Particularly in the Sabarimala case, what are the origins? Or for that matter, you discuss, is it about menstruation, is it not about menstruation, whatever it is. Do not shy away from stating things for what they actually are and then defend it. There's nothing wrong with it. People have been able to defend worse. Others have been able to defend the worst of practices possible. What is your problem? The problem is a certain conditioning which has happened over decades through multiple processes, through multiple sources. We are constantly told that you're wrong, you're an idiot, your father was an idiot, your great-grandfather, everybody was an idiot. So once they keep telling you this, your ability to stand up for your own point of view is significantly dulled. According to me, this is a clear psyop. It's a clear psychological operation which has been in existence for years together. So my strategy then is to say, okay, let's take the bull by its horns. There is no let's say, gain in playing like Dravid on that particular front. Then you go a proper Dhoni, which is take up the issue, explain to me what is the problem, explain to me whether the problem lies in the tradition or in your point of view. Are you projecting and imposing your point of view on a tradition and twisting the nature of the tradition yourself, or is the tradition truly what you say it is? That's when you immediately call the bluff of the other side. So I think, unfortunately, we have arrived at a stage where accommodation is a sign of weakness. It goes against the very grain of our spirit. It goes against the very grain of our culture and its journey of the last at least 10,000 years. I wouldn't call it 5,000 years. So as far as I'm concerned, unless and until this reality is accepted and we take it to its logical conclusion, because only when you take it to its logical conclusion, you can go back to a stage where you can get more accommodative. But now it is not a case of finding balance. It has become an ideological war for all practical purposes. It is a civilizational war for all practical purposes. And in war, there cannot be a compromise unless and until both sides are interested in compromise. As alarmist as it may sound and as extreme as it may sound, I have accepted the reality. It is a question of how many of us accept the reality.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense, of course, as you always do. And
I just wanted to add one thing. So the speaker who first introduced this, he said, without any further delay. He meant further delay because the delay was primarily because of me, so my apologies.
right. So you have acquired a bit of a reputation as a late Latif. So anyway, coming to you, Sureshji, you are perhaps the most qualified to speak about this whole business of manufacturing narrative, because you are an insider in the media, and while you may have your own professional constraints in speaking openly in some ways, but I suppose you could open up as much as possible for us. My question is, in the media institutes, when they train journalists, how do you inculcate this this notion of there being a distinction between reporting versus opinion making. And what is the ideal balance between the two? Because I understand that when you are reporting news, unless you tell a story, people won't buy it. So there is that obligation that reporters have towards people. But then when it is taken too far, it becomes a little problematic. So where do you actually draw that line?
Thank you. Though, of course, there are official constraints, but I have been very openly speaking about many issues, and they have also been reported widely in the media, extensively, for the right or wrong reasons, whatever. I remember, I'm sure you must all have read, when the police officer who broke the back of Naxalism in Chhattisgarh, SRP Kalluri, when I invited him, there was a huge furore in media, and there were groups outside my institute protesting. There was police force inside, just because this man was coming and addressing media students. There were a lot of journalists. I never stopped anybody from asking questions, and they are saying that Mr. Siddharth Vargarajan wrote an article against me. Your Ravish Kumar wrote an article against me. And my mistake, according to them, was that I invited somebody who is a human rights violator. So I said that my response was that as a journalist, I should be talking to everybody. You are okay with talking to Hurriyat leaders. You are okay talking to terrorists. You are okay talking to Naxalites. But you have a problem when you want to even, we are not saying that, you can ask him questions. But to say that journalism or media students should not even be listening to Mr. Kalluri just because you don't agree with him. I said that that's not journalism for me, I'm sorry. As a journalist, I have traveled across the globe. I have met all kinds of people. How can you say that you should be meeting only a particular brand of people? Now, that is what is happening today. And the next day when I defended it on the open stage, the Times of India reported a defiant Director General. Whom did I defy? This is the kind of words that they used. For the simple reason, because today you have an agenda-driven journalism. I often say that today activism has replaced journalism. A lot of activists are now posturing to be journalists. You saw what happened to Ashutosh. He never revealed that he was on the side of AAP during that entire election. But after the elections, he jumps onto the bandwagon. Now, this is what is happening. Now, what is the difference? Often people ask me, that, why not? What's wrong in an activist becoming a journalist? I give them an example. I said, suppose you are an animal activist. I'm not talking about animal lover. I'm talking about an animal activist. And suppose, for example, in the state of Kerala, there was a lot of problem related to dog bites. And those problems are existing in Delhi also. You have monkey menace in a lot of cities across the country. Shimla people are not able to live in their houses because of the monkey menace. Now, if you're an animal activist, you will only look at that problem from the animal's perspective. You will say, oh, dogs are being tortured, dogs are being denied their animal rights, and blah, blah, blah. But you will not see the point of view of a mother whose child has been ripped apart by that dog. You will not see the point of view of, people who have been bitten and who have to go through this rabies, injection. You will not see their pain because you can only see the pain of the animal. Okay, we also love animals. But if you are a journalist, you got to be objective. You have to see both sides. That is the difference between an activist and a journalist. The activist sees it only from one point of view. There you will only see that, look, there is a problem. Kudankulam is going to be another Chernobyl. Nuclear power is not good for the country, so we protest against it. You don't see the perspective that that is an American conspiracy because Kudankulam plant was to be commissioned by the Russians. You don't see that. Now this is the problem, that you tend to see things from a particular perspective and you tend to project it as the truth. And to me that is fake news. Fake news is when you suppress information. For example, this whole narrative of undeclared emergency. This undeclared emergency is being talked about by people who have neither witnessed emergency nor even bothered to read about emergency. If they read even one book, like what Mr. L.K. Advani had said, that when they were asked to bend, they crawled. And they were talking about journalists. You had newspapers which were totally blacked out. Police inspectors were deciding which news item will go, which will get published. And you are comparing it to this place. And they say that no journalists, nobody can talk anything. I mean, you open any channel, they are abusive of the government in power. So anybody, I totally agree with this contention, their contention that yes, criticizing the government is not criticizing the nation. But supporting the country is also not being a bhakt. If you say anything in defense of the country or its armed forces or anything, immediately you are dubbed as a bhakt. I mean, this is something totally unacceptable. Now, this is the kind of narrative. Look at this arrest by these people who were in the last few days. Now, it is for the courts to decide whether they are guilty or not. But these were the same people who were picked up, detained, put behind the bars by the previous regime. At that time, nobody talked about undeclared emergency. Today, everybody is talking about undeclared emergency. Today, everybody is talking about, and this has been happening. You know what had happened in Syria? What had happened in Iraq? This is a concerted attempt which is to malign the regime in such a manner that there is so much of, venom, there's so much of viciousness in the society is created, and you have seen the outcomes, whether it is Syria or Iraq. Those countries have been destroyed because such kind of a venom was, spewed by these vested interests whose only objective was to destabilize a particular regime. And things were exaggerated beyond a point, and everybody started thinking about it. Oh man, is the situation that bad? And I don't see it, honestly. Just last month I was in Kashmir with my family. I toured across the valley for 10-15 days without any escort, without any security. We went around. We had a great time. There were a couple of mohallas, in downtown Srinagar, which was a little sensitive. There could be some problems. And we were in our hotel room looking at news item in one of those areas which we had bypassed, The whole of the city was normal. There was some stone pelting incident. What was the headline? Kashmir on the boil. Kashmir on the edge. I said, I am sitting there, damn it. I don't see it either on boil or on the edge. Because this is being deliberately done. That yes, we have to project in such a way. And you know what is the interesting part? The interesting part is Kashmir is being reported only by journalists from the Kashmir Valley. No outsider is allowed virtually to report from there. So what happens is a particular narrative is being dished out from there. Oh, human rights violation. So,
I'll just interrupt you.
Yeah.
I've seen Barkha Death report from
Yes.
Kashmir.
No, that is not an assignment. I'm talking about regular postings and deployment. Somebody going off and on I have reported from Kashmir. But that's for a limited period. I'm talking about all the permanent. You just switch on to any channel. So you will have a Mufti Islah, you will have somebody. They are all from a particular, that valley area and from a particular community. And they have their own narrative. That's being given to the whole country. So this is the sad part of it, that narratives are being deliberately, created with the objective of, whatever has been mentioned here, to create an atmosphere of hatred, That's being done. And we should know that this is not correct. Now, imagine somebody in my institution who is a totally disobedient, indisciplined contract worker, and he is only an associate. I terminate him as per the rules, existing rules, wherein I can remove a contract employee with a 1 month's notice. And you know what is the headline? IIMC sacks a professor. And I keep telling them, calling them up. I'm saying that he has never been a professor, he is nowhere near a professor. But then they maintain that thing, And then what he does is that this man suddenly creates a story that, this administration has been discriminating against people from a particular community, and he takes the name of a particular boy. And that poor boy, his mother was not keeping well, he himself was not well. I gave him hostel accommodation. There was no provision in the hostel rules for that. But I went out of my way to accommodate him. And this boy is saying that, when did this gentleman even bother to even meet me? The administration has gone out of its way to accommodate me, but then he goes around and that is being, what should I say, presented to the whole readership as if this is a big case of discrimination, and this man was removed because he was raking up some issues which were, totally very discriminatory, and that is why I sacked him. Whereas he was sacked for indiscipline. So this is just an instance because this man belonged to, he was a card holder. So now this, you just cannot touch anybody. If you say anything politically correct, incorrect, so I would rather agree with that term. This is basically that Lutyens, Now what is happening with the Lutyens is that, Arnab Goswami is very fond of using that, but it's a fact. Today, many people who are thriving for the last 7 decades, they find that suddenly their shops have shut. They are no more in that club. They are no more being encouraged by those in the power. Because it was a coterie which was working. And that coterie is now being demolished. So they are suddenly feeling that insecurity. That look, now we have lost it out. The scholarships, the fellowships, the foreign visits, that's all now being very appropriately distributed to the deserving. Which was all being given only to a handful of people who were either cardholders or who were nominated by the so-called intellectuals. Now that thing is gone. So suddenly that patronage is missing. So they feel that this is the right time to strike back. Because if this continues, then we will never be able to come back. And that is why these narratives are being manufactured with the only objective of ensuring that their, what should I call in Hindi, dukan, their shops that were peddling mediocrity, that were only promoting a particular brand of ideology, that now is under threat. So the only thing is that let's go ahead, create a narrative and ensure that everybody is defamed. Nobody, if you look at the narrative, nobody from how can this happen? That since when have students started deciding who should be the chairman of FTII? Can you imagine? I don't know how many of you will remember who were all the chairmen of FTII. None of us would remember. Who were all the great illustrious people who were heading FTII? None of us remembers. But then suddenly everybody started talking about Gajendra Chauhan's merit. Now this, since when students have started deciding who should be the chairman, who should be the principal, who should be the vice chancellor, this is a new trend that is happening, It was always governments which would decide and nobody would be, questioning them. But now a new narrative that students would decide That what is the merit of a particular person to be the vice chancellor? What's the merit of a particular person to be heading an institute? So these questions are being asked. Now, why these norms, new norms that are, and these norms are all coming post 2014. That's the interesting part. These objectivity, these interesting questions, these are all coming post 2014. So it's time we start questioning this, that this question, these questions. I think that's important. Let's not get carried away. That's my only thing. That's when people start getting carried away by this propaganda, that's when the problem comes.
So while I broadly agree with everything that you said, I think that the problem is not just about 2014 because this is a global problem. Even in the West, there is a way in which the media goes about its business. Trump had a similar problem with the media. Even in Europe, there are slants and stories which are spun based on what people consider to be the more virtuous end goal. So I'll come back to you on that and how.
I'll also respond to that.
Yeah, I'll come back to that. But coming back to Mishra ji, now this was a perspective given from a media insider. As an informed consumer of news, how do you rate the news that is published in newspapers and that is broadcasted over television studios? And how credible do you think it is, and how do you separate fake from real? I'm not talking to you as the head of an institute here, but as a consumer of news per se.
First of all, even for our students, I would like to explain here. We don't suggest students to watch every news that comes in every channel, right? All that. This is because of lack of credibility, because they're going to be civil servants for the country. So even in the question paper also, a lot of objectivity is expected, right? So we don't advise that you should keep watching this and that news. You have to be slightly careful. And that's the reason sometimes we suggest news even to watch Lok Sabha, Raj Sabha channel, DD National. That by and large there is not much of the commercial motives involved there. But overall, if any kind of publicity is done, like even say institutes, they advertise. We keep watching a lot of claims being done by very newcomers. They come and say that 10 years of experience, 5,000 selections, and these all things. So the students, they normally they don't have any medium to check that what exactly is there, and maybe they are carried away with that. As I told that if the news is coming only of the toppers, so that either it can give them over enthusiasm that everybody will become topper, or they will get discouraged that since I can't be the topper, so I can't there. The idea is overall the credibility of news has to be high. It should be a kind of accountability which anything comes, and there should be some mechanism to check that. Of course, in democracy we have freedom to say what there, but this freedom should not be misused. There should be a lot of responsibility, and especially in the case of, especially with my experience, I will tell, because when we teach in the classes, we try to allow discussions on any issues. Maybe three newspapers have covered the same news in 3 different articles. So we don't say that you just follow the one, read all the 3, and then come out with your own positive opinion about that. What is the real possibility behind it? Not to just accept that you read somewhere and just copy it there. Even the examiner does not value it, but at least for your growth also, it is not good that you just take one perspective and follow it and carry in your life there. So a lot of ideological difference. In class, we start finding that students start quarreling. This perspective is good, that perspective is good. But finally, by moderating, as you are nicely doing right now, so we are in a position to come out with a solution there. So from the consumer's perspective, I will say that most of the people are not that aware of what is the correct news there and what is the right information. So there should be some mechanism, some accountability at the same time, some check, I feel, so that there is only correct information going. Not I'm saying that only one particular information, But perspective should be given to the people and should be allowed to the public in general to develop an opinion, not that one set opinion is given. This is my
That's a very interesting point Vishnaji has raised, because the only way to form an accurate opinion about events is to go through different sources of news and then make an assessment which parts of which news you would take to build a model of the actual events as they happen. The problem that we have is that everyone narrates events and gives out news in the same way. There is the slant is always the same, or it is binary. There is one set which leans towards the left, there is another set which leans towards the right, as they say. Although this is not particularly applicable to India, but yeah, broadly speaking, you can say that there are these binaries which are at odds with each other. But then there is no dialogue between the two. So you often end up subscribing to a biased or a very partisan view, and your own view tends to become extremely polarized, as they say. Now coming back to Sai Deepak, there is much that reporters and journalists can learn from your profession. In the sense that when you take up a case, right, so you leave behind your ideological commitments and you learn to suppress some of your gut reactions and gut feelings for the benefit of presenting your client's case as accurately and in as much integrity as possible. Now that is something that would benefit reporters as well, because all of us are human beings, we have feelings and we've been raised in a certain way. And especially the English news media, the kind of journalists that you see often come from very similar backgrounds. So how would you, if you were to, let's say you were to interact with some journalists, what would be your suggestions and some pointers that you would give to them in order to, tackle this problem of reporting things by blocking or suppressing their gut reaction to it?
I don't have an answer to that question. And the reason for that is this. The situation or the circumstances or the boundary conditions within which a journalist operates today is very different from that of an independent lawyer. I'm not dependent on anyone for my survival largely. It's me and my clients. And then I'm dependent on having a sympathetic audience and at least a fair audience before court. I am not bound by the vagaries of peer pressure. I can hold the most obnoxious of opinions or the most politically incorrect of opinions, but if I'm good at what I do, I cannot be ignored in my profession. That's more or less how it operates. You can't say that of a journalist. I know of any number of journalists from so-called left-oriented organizations who are as right as they can get in their orientation, but who have to keep their mouth shut as for the entire duration of their existence, or let's say their tenure with their organization, until they find a viable alternative. They have no other option. So these are the kind of people who come and encourage us during the course of these hearings, and they say, we can't support you openly, but fantastic. Some even manage to put their reputations and their lives on the line, or their survival on the line, and they openly encourage us. So that is very heartening to note. So which is why I find it very difficult to attribute malice to all aspects of mainstream media, because there are pockets and there are people who are actually genuine and who are good. So that's point number one. So apart from the constraint, the second is, even if there is no such constraint, I can share these, let's say, pointers in terms of how you remain objective in your reportage, provided you're interested in being objective. I find that lacking. I find that seriously absent. So to my mind, if you're not willing to listen, then there must be an external pressure or an external stimulus which forces you to change your ways. And that for me is the social media and alternative media platforms that are emerging. But this reflects poorly on a certain ecosystem, which is if the left has managed to cultivate an ecosystem and has managed to get its act together, it's surprising that the right, or so-called the alternative dispensation which is now in power, has not deemed it fit to support the building blocks in the last 4.5 to 5 years. So that actually shows that despite being forced to dance to the tunes of the other side, even after them having lost power, you still have not recognized the value of media. The other side is practically not in power in most of Indian states, nor in the center. But the one place that they have managed to make their presence felt is media. And in the last 4 years, every day something or the other is set out and you're forced to respond to that. Second is in the judiciary, since they are actively present, or rather in the courtrooms they're actively present, they managed to make their presence felt. Then is the campus left. So academia, media, and the judicial system. They have decided that these are the checkpoints when it comes to information access and justice dispensation. These 3 points alone can turn the course of a narrative and can render your electoral victories completely useless. And they've managed to prove it with barely 44 seats. You failed to recognize the value of this. But fortunately, private efforts and individual efforts outside of the so-called government establishment have managed to do a few things. But then the scale is still not comparable, because this is it's a case of scale of economies. How many people are able to access your information? And most importantly, the level at which private initiatives operate is slightly super sophisticated. And it depends on people who are aware and who are over and above the average readership. So anyone who relies on television and newspapers primarily for a source of consumption is certainly not in your target list. He is not a target audience. Therefore, the number of people that you are able to target automatically comes down. And then is the second level. So you need to be able to marry scale with content. And importantly, do you want to be objective or do you want to push your own agenda? That is also still unclear. Now, for me, in the interest of posterity, in the long run, we are fighting not for one ideology, we are not fighting for one point of view, we are fighting for the ability to present the truth, according to me. So, even if the other side has decided to go into a suicidal mode and says that if I die, I will take everybody along with me, I'll take them down with me, we still don't have that option. So you will have to fight the good fight, which is to ensure that you stave off all the negative impact that they create. And you will also have to think for the future, which is to say, I want a positive history or a positive narrative to come out as far as India is concerned, not to sugarcoat and gloss over every mistake that we may have committed as a civilization or as a culture, but also showcase that we have learned from our mistakes and we have moved forward. Therefore, the fight that this particular side or the Indic side has is a tougher one, it's an uphill task. Efforts like UPWORD, efforts like Pragyata's videos and others, and other efforts, according to me, they're a ray of sunshine and a ray of hope. Because then that tells me that there are still people who are interested in putting out these kind of facts. And the kind of reception that you get tells me that there is still some sort of hope in the leadership. The thing is, if this were to get the multiplier effect of the state, then I ask myself, what are the possibilities? No matter how much you invest in private efforts, it is difficult to deny the multiplier effect of the state. Whether it comes to language adoption, when it comes to policy adoption, changing of attitudes, whatnot. Swachh Bharat, according to me, is not completely a success. But the concept of cleanliness and the concept of civic sense in public spaces, which the state has managed to put out as at least an end goal, has created some sort of effect. Because now if somebody spits on the road, you'll say the government is speaking of Swachh Bharat, has some common sense. You'll have some people talk aloud, speak out aloud. So I would say that the last 4 years have managed to showcase the failure of this side in recognizing the importance of media building and the importance of narrative building. But the flip side is that it has pushed private efforts and it has pushed us to get down into the grassroots, and we have decided to put our feet on the ground. If at some stage there is a change of heart, a sudden dawning of intelligence and a sudden dawning of Vivek in the establishment, and then they decide, no, I think we need to invest in this, otherwise all our electoral victories will be reduced to a naught, I think that is when the tide will completely turn. I'm just hoping for that one fine day to arrive.
Lovely point. And I think that fits beautifully with what I was planning to ask you, Sureshji, which is where you ended. You were talking about the fake news and the multiple narratives. And I wanted to ask you, what is the role of educational institutions to train people to think in a certain way, to report accurately, and where do you draw that line between opinion making and reporting? And is it even possible in a largely corporate funded media environment?
Well, to begin with, let me tell you that it's not that totally the dispensation has ignored these parts. I think that JNU is a classic example where changes are being brought in, and there are other universities also where changes are being brought in. So, but yes, it's a slow process. Maybe it can be fast tracked, but it may take some time. Coming to your question, yes. Let me give you an instance of what we are doing. One of the things we have so far been at our institute for the last 53 years, we have been teaching only Western communication models. Now what we have started is also the Indian communication model, including Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra, in every class that is being taught. And contrary to the narrative that was created that the institution will decline, in the last 2.5 years, we have included regular, units on the darkest period in Indian media's history. That's the emergency. That's now part of the curriculum. This Indian communication model as against the Western communication model, that's part of it. Foreign students who were being, rather mid-career journalists from foreign countries who were being trained at the institute, they were being only told about developmental issues. Now they have to mandatorily study something called Understanding India. I mean, MEA is funding that entire project and we are not telling them a word about India. Now there is a whole unit on India, its history, its culture. And now when they go out, they become India's unofficial ambassadors. And these 2.5 years, because this narrative is that all institutions are declining ever since this dispensation has put its people. This year, India Today has ranked us as India's #1 mass communication institute. The weak, equally critical of the government, has ranked us as India's #1 mass communication institute. This doesn't come just like that. The number of applications has gone up for admission. There's a craze all over. IMC is the buzzword today. So that means that there are takers and now the placements are almost 100%. Because our students, I have repeatedly said, we are preparing global journalists with strong Indian roots. I mean, they are journalists, they're trained to be global, we give them the best of technological inputs, but we also tell them about this country, about its history, about, what all they should be knowing about this country and the interests of the country. So that's very important. And I think that's slowly happening in a lot of institutions. And that's bringing about this change that Sai was talking about. This private-driven initiative, wherein you have a lot of things like Swarajya, you have Indus Scrolls, a lot of these initiatives are coming up because of the people who are coming out of these educational institutions. Whether it is IIMC, whether it's Makhanlal Chaturvedi National University of Journalism in Bhopal or the Kushabao Thakre University of Journalism in Raipur, the students who are coming out with a lot of much more professionalism, but at the same time a sense of responsibility to the society. They have been categorically told that yes, freedom of speech and expression, yes. Liberty, yes, but license, no. Liberty does not mean license. That's what, is being told to them. So these changes are taking place. FTI, things are changing. All these major institutions which are there, yes, as I said, that it has been dominated by a discourse for the last 7 decades. Most of the faculty members still owe their affiliations and loyalties to the other side. They are yet to accept it, but they have realized that this is also a truth and this is not what you call an aberration or a deviation. This is here to stay. So better try to interact with it, engage with it and learn from it. And some people are changing. Not just because they are opportunists, but also because they have realized that yes, maybe we were chasing something that was wrong. Maybe that was under pressure. Because if you wanted to get a scholarship, if you wanted to get a fellowship, you had to be one of them. And today they have realized, no, I can have my own viewpoint, and still I can be successful in academics, in media. Why is it that in an organization like India today, if you have a Rajdeep Sardesai, you also have a Gaurav Samant? Why is it that the Times now, which used to be very critical, is now talking in a different language? Why is it that Newsets is talking in a different language? Not because they are being very supportive of us, because they realize that the market wants that. These are commercial organizations. They are not doing any charity. If they are talking in a particular, an entire channel like Republic comes up only to cater to the growing demands of a population which wants a certain set of news to be looked at from a certain point of view, not from the point of view through which it was being looked at for the last 7 decades. So suddenly it becomes one of the most successful channels. It's because there are readers, viewers who want to see this platform, who want to see these debates happening. So they are not doing any charity. They have realized that the public sentiments are changing. And that's going to make, whether it's government, private sector, corporate entities, they will be left with no option. If they know that the people are thinking, people are no more, prisoners of a particular narrative, which they were all these years. And it's time journalists also come out of this. I'm not saying that they should subscribe to a particular viewpoint, but what I'm saying is that they should also open up to the other viewpoint. Why have we lost? The journalists could not predict, you refer to the American election. The same thing. The American newspapers were, shouting from the top of the world, Madam President, about Hillary Clinton. But what happened? And they were projecting Trump like a buffoon, a joker. But then Trump represented a viewpoint which felt that America's interests were being sold out. That America has become a hub for all the refugees who are coming there and who are indulging in violence. So, there was this viewpoint that our national interests, protectionism or whatever you call it, that is being compromised with. Now, I as an Indian will not agree with that American viewpoint. But for the American, that was valid. Right? And Trump represented that. I'm not defending Trump by any chance. But the fact is that we ignored it. I remember when I was in UK and I was discussing with a British journalist, very senior. He was a South Asia correspondent for BBC here. And I was discussing with him. He said that, well, what is your viewpoint? I said that I think Trump is going to make it. This was just before the American elections. And he told me that, oh, sitting in India, you are saying that Trump will win? I said, yes, sitting in India, I am thinking because you are not reading the other side. And that's the problem. We got the 2014 wrong. We got Gujarat wrong. We got Delhi wrong. We got UP wrong. The media got it all wrong because we are totally disconnected from harsh ground realities. We are all living in our comfort zones where I want to listen to only a viewpoint which echoes my viewpoint. I am not ready to go out and talk to somebody, who will say something else. Because that's what they got. Today you look at, this entire narrative about demonetization, and you look at NDTV for instance. The correspondent will only speak to traders who will be critical of the government. You will not hear a single voice which would be either defensive or which would put out a balanced viewpoint. No. The person, the correspondent will certainly go out, seek out a person who will criticize and damn the government. Now that's not journalism. You can have that critical viewpoint, you should have, but to say that there are always two sides to a coin, it cannot be only one side. And that is the sad part, and that's why media is losing its credibility. Because you are talking about only one side of the coin. There are two sides, and that need to be, and I think that's now what we are teaching in our institutions, that yes, there are two or more than two sides to a coin, and you need to understand that. Don't just go by that one particular line that is being parroted and narrated to you. That's the point.
So in other words, the media is a victim of its own narrative, and what that implies is exactly what Saideepak pointed out a few minutes ago so beautifully, about the fact that now one side which had an absolute control over public discourse for the last 7 decades, now that they see that their voice is being challenged, they have developed an attitude which is something like how I used to play chess, which is to say that because I never had the patience for the game, and after 15 minutes I would be like, अच्छा इसकी मैं रानी मार देता हूँ, मेरा भी जाएगा तो जाने दो. So it's that same sort of psychological orientation which says कि हमारी नैया तो डूब ही रही है, इनको भी साथ लेके डूबेंगे. Now this brings a very interesting, and I'm concluding here because you have a flight to catch, and we'll take questions after you leave for the airport. But I'll conclude with one small example of how what Daniel Kahneman has called the illusion of validity. So he was like me, he was not into stock trading, and he was supposed to give a lecture at a big Wall Street company, where he asked people, okay, so when you sell your shares, when you sell stocks, who buys the stocks, right? And they're saying people buy stocks. So even if there is a stock which is doing very badly, there is someone to buy it, which gave him an insight that in the world there are so many narratives that there are people who are actually buying those stocks thinking that because they have a different story in mind, and they're thinking that we are doing something which is intelligent. Now, when he continued that study, this is a very, very interesting sort of overview of how narratives play out. When he concluded the study, he found, and there were other researchers involved, he found that most of the people involved in stock trading are men. They're passionately involved. They look at their stocks every day and they find, अच्छा ये अभी stock market यहाँ जा रहा है, वहाँ जा रहा है, and they do a lot of trading. But when you compare that to women, they just buy stocks. Mostly, I'm speaking generally, not specifically. Of course, there are exceptions. But when women indulge in stock trading, they generally tend to buy stocks and then have a look at it a year later. So if you do a 10-year study, you will find that women actually do better at stock market rather than men. Because the sad reality is that no one really can predict how the stock market will behave, and everyone has a different story to tell, which is similar to how the media reports. So the real test of a narrative is the predictability of events, which, as you rightly pointed out, most media organizations, most journalists fail to do. An overwhelming majority of people fail to do that. So from that standpoint, I think the intervention of state and amplification that Saideepak was talking about is not something that I'm particularly optimistic about. If it happens, well and good, but I think that these grassroots movements and the involvement of people and representing the people's point of view is what would make a difference in the long term. And with that, I think we can conclude, and that is, I suppose, the purpose of UPWORD as well, that we represent the thoughts and the ethos of the land in a way which is not activist oriented. We take stands, we talk about stuff, but we are always we have that reverence towards the truth, which I suppose agenda-driven and politically invested journalists should. So with that, I thank all of you, and we'll open it up for questions after Sir leaves.
Question or two,
Sure.
specifically that.
Can I take somebody's up? Good evening to the panelists. Myself being a journalist and knowing two of the panelists here. So my question, and I feel whatever has gone through and what Deepak has said rightly, what you said was a journalist would learn from an advocate. So he had said, I don't have an answer to that. And I would also disagree. A journalist would never learn from an advocate who would please the client's case, So because then we lose the purpose. We'll not see two sides of the coin, and we have to bring the truth to the people. I have a question is when you're talking about manufacturing narratives, so it's like a factory, So with the social media in place, we have the WhatsApp factories. We have the BJP, we have the AAP factories, we have the Congress factories. So if somebody could comment on this, if Sai could comment on that.
So, recently, I think on Rajya Sabha TV, a week ago, there was this debate on this program called The Big Picture. In the backdrop of the government's active initiatives and interaction with WhatsApp, asking it to rein in fake news. So, there were 4 panelists. One of them was a brilliant techie by the name Jitin Jain. And during the course of the interaction, I realized one thing. My point was, why are we linking only fake news with WhatsApp? Well, in fact, perhaps mainstream media has contributed much more to it. And mainstream media being mainstream has a long-term deleterious, devastating effect on what you consume, because most people now have decided to derogate any information received from WhatsApp. Automatically that filter is coming in your head. Kahan pe padha hai? WhatsApp pe to galat hi hoga. Automatically that filter is come. But you're not able to do the same thing to mainstream media. So I presented a slightly unpopular point of view to basically say, if you want to focus on fake news, then kindly do not leave the aspect of regulation of news only to the Press Council of India or whatever it is, because self-regulation has completely failed according to me. Nobody takes action against anyone. So that club needs to be broken, and there needs to be laws. And I'm not saying that laws for the purposes of censorship, but at least laws for the purposes of going after someone who has not done his or her due diligence. So the concept of a Reynolds defense, which is usually used in the UK, is a journalist who has not done the expected levels of due diligence must pay the price for it in one way or the other. And the organization that gives its stamp of approval to that particular piece of information, which is put out in public domain for consumption, must also take the rap on its knuckle and the flak for it. This talk, the moment it starts, is immediately interpreted as anti-free speech talk and anti-media talk. And to my mind, no government has the guts to do it. It may have had the guts had there not been an emergency, but now because you have the emergency to constantly throw at people's faces, anything that you do will be compared with the emergency. So according to me, what Ms. Smriti Irani proposed was perhaps something the government should have followed up with. When it has the majority, when it is not dependent on coalition partners, it should have followed through. Instead, they choose to believe one organization and they chose to go after one entity only because WhatsApp is the problem. As far as I'm concerned, that truncated approach was the issue. Take a position with respect to fake news, separate fake news from free speech, and say that you have every right in the world. You can go wrong. Nobody is saying that a journalist cannot go wrong. But there are certain levels of due diligence that must be cast away. That discussion is not happening. There was a good start that was made, but immediately the government pulled it out. The reason why I brought out this particular discussion is, while I was trying to push this point of view in that particular discussion, big picture is a relatively saner debate compared to any other format that I have come across so far. Even there it did not find traction, for the simple reason that we focus on what is popular as opposed to what is right. Unfortunately, that is the nature of human tendency, and particularly when you have sensationalist, streams of thought, it becomes difficult for a sane point of view to come across. I'm not saying mine was the only sane point of view. I'm clearly saying that every forum which is responsible for dissemination of fake news must be gone after. But by focusing this entire discussion and limiting it to one forum and one particular institution, the larger point of the big picture was completely missed. So in my mind, you need to come out of this myth of self-regulation. There is no such thing as self-regulation. Whether it exists in any other jurisdiction, in India it's humbug, regardless of whichever industry or whichever segment you're speaking of. So the government needs to take a position, and a government which has perhaps had the largest majority after the Rajiv Gandhi government should perhaps find in itself the spine, the guts, the gumption, the sensibility and the vision to take it forward.
Just to add on to what he's saying, that you see, I also totally agree with this. I have said it at different forums that this whole blame game on fake news being carried by only social media. I don't remember the biggest fake news so far as I remember is that the Indian Army is going to carry out a coup, and that was in the Indian Express led by Shekhar Gupta, the great champion of freedom of speech. It was a banner headline. There was no bigger fake news than that in recent times. But nobody is talking about it. Yes, and nobody is talking about it, because it's not fashionable. You have now you look at so many items that's appearing on day in and day out on the so-called mainstream media, and you will be shocked. A lot of that stuff, that entire Rajasthan lynching turned out to be a custodial death. It was a police custodial death which was projected as a lynching because it's fashionable to talk about lynching, and the lynching in Karnataka, the victim and the perpetrators both belong to the same community. Both were from the minorities, but nobody talked about this. This lynching is being, totally linked to a particular ideology. Now, if there are cases, yes, projected. But when there are no cases, why are you trying to make out? You are trying to manufacture. That's what is happening. That you are trying to manufacture. And this is the problem. And I also tend to say that, no, the kind of, the other day, just a small instance, I have imposed CCS, that's, Central Civil Service Rules on my employees. And it became a big issue. So when I had gone to JNU, some of these journalists came and asked me that, how can you, do that in a media institution? I said, that you cannot criticize the government, and CCS rule says that. I said, you are from which channel? He said that I am from NDTV. I said, in NDTV, can you survive after criticizing Mr. Prannoy Roy? I asked the other journalists, you are from which channel? He said that I am from the Hindu. I said, dare to write one word against N. Ram or Ravi. And if you survive, I will take back these rules. Now, these double standards. When one employee is suspended, the media creates such a big scene, and overnight NDTV terminates 300 employees, and not a single word is uttered. Newspapers and television channels routinely terminate the services of 100 employees in one go, and nobody talks about it because there is a fraternity. They won't talk about each other, removing. But if you suspend, even dare to suspend one employee, you are immediately get out. How dare you? I can terminate overnight 300 people, but you will not. Nobody in my organization can question, Now, a lot of these channels are being run by real estate workers. Real estate people are running many of these channels, and they are indulging. For them, this is a facade. For them, this is only a platform to blackmail. But still, what is happening? If you act against them, whether it is with reference to Enforcement Directorate or Foreign Exchange violation, FEMA, even then it is being projected as an attack on media. That is the sad part of it. So you can violate all rules just because you run a media organization. That's just not done. So this is the kind of stuff that is being dished out, and I think that the key to it lies in being aware of what is happening, not believing on the face of it the narrative that is being sold, but to go a little deep and find out what is the truth. Is the truth being told, or is there something more than what meets the eye? And that calls for an enlightened readership, an enlightened viewership, and an enlightened listenership, and which is critical both for democracy and for media. Thank you.